Hello, everyone. I never thought betrayal would feel like this, like a slow burning fire under my skin, eating away at every part of me. The night I discovered the truth, the world around me became unrecognizable. It was as if someone had replaced my life with a cruel imitation, a twisted joke meant to break me. It started subtly, a shift in her eyes when she spoke to me, a hesitation in her touch, an absence in her presence. I ignored it at first. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was just paranoid. After all, we had built something strong together. Or so I believed. I should have seen it earlier. The late nights that stretched into early mornings, the vague excuses, the sudden obsession with her phone. I told myself she was just busy, that life had become demanding. But deep down, I felt the truth crawling toward me, whispering in my ear, waiting for me to face it. And then, one night I did. She was in the shower when her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I never wanted to be the type of man who snooped, but something inside me screamed to look. I reached for it, hesitated, then unlocked it with a code I once thought was ours alone. The messages were there, plain as day. Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you. I wish I was with you right now. My hands went numb. My vision blurred. Every word felt like a blade against my ribs, slicing through flesh and bone. My breath came short and shallow as I scrolled, my heart pounding so violently that I thought it might give out. Pictures, inside jokes, plans for the future, a life I wasn't part of. The sound of water stopped. The door creaked open. She stepped out, a towel wrapped around her body, droplets glistening on her skin, the same skin another man had touched. She smiled when she saw me. That same smile I once thought belonged to me alone. But now I knew the truth. I wasn't her only love. And in that moment, something inside me shattered. She smiled at me, completely unaware that I was drowning in the wreckage of what she had done. Her hair was damp, clinging to her shoulders, and her scent, once intoxicating, now made me sick. I must have looked different to her. Stiff, cold, like a man who had just stared into the abyss and found nothing but betrayal staring back. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice laced with feigned concern. I clenched her phone in my hand. Who is he? The moment the words left my mouth, I saw it. The flicker of panic, the split-second hesitation before she forced a confused expression onto her face. "What are you talking about?" she said, tilted her head like she could fool me with that same innocent act she perfected over the years. I raised the phone, showing her the messages. Her eyes widened, her lips parted, but no words came out. The silence was heavier than any confession could have been. And then she did what liars always do. "Why were you looking through my phone?" I almost laughed. Almost. Because this was the moment, wasn't it? The moment she would turn around, make me the villain, pretend my discovery was the real crime, not her betrayal. "Don't," I said, my voice low, steady. "Don't even try." She wrapped the towel tighter around herself like it could shield her from the truth. "It's not what you think," she whispered. I clenched my jaw. "Then tell me, what is it?" She hesitated again. That was all I needed to see. The woman I had loved, trusted, given everything to, she was calculating, trying to find the right words, the right lie to feed me. But I wasn't hungry for her lies anymore. "You've been sleeping with him," I said, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. Her lower lip trembled, but no denial came. And just like that, I knew it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a drunken lapse in judgment. It wasn't something she regretted. This was deliberate, planned, ongoing. "You don't understand," she started, but I cut her off. "How long?" She swallowed hard. A few months. A few months. While I held her at night, while I kissed her good morning, while I thought we were still something worth fighting for. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I saw her for what she truly was. Not my love, not my partner, just a stranger wearing the face of the woman I thought I knew. A few months. The words echoed in my head, hollow and relentless, like the ticking of a clock counting down to the moment my world would completely collapse. I stared at her, waiting for what I didn't know. A real explanation? A shred of remorse? Something that might make this less unbearable? But all she gave me was silence. That was the worst part. Not the cheating itself, not even the deception. It was the emptiness in her eyes. I wanted her to cry, to fall to her knees, to beg me to forgive her. Instead, she just stood there, watching me, calculating, wondering how much she could salvage. "Say something," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I exhaled, trying to steady the rage clawing its way up my throat. "What do you want me to say?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. Finally, she said, "I didn't mean for this to happen." I let out a bitter laugh. "You didn't mean to sleep with him? You didn't mean to lie to me? You didn't mean to throw away everything we built?" She flinched, but I didn't care. She should feel the weight of this. She should feel every ounce of the devastation she'd caused. "Who is he?" I asked. She hesitated again, and I could practically see the gears turning in her mind. She was still trying to control the damage. "It doesn't matter," she said eventually. I stepped closer, my grip tightening on the phone. "It matters to me." She sighed, running a hand through her wet hair. "It's someone from work." Of course it was. I felt sick. How many times had she left in the morning, kissing me goodbye before going in? How many nights had she come home to me, carrying the scent of another man on her skin? My stomach churned. I felt like I was going to be sick. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said, her voice softer now, like she actually thought that mattered. "But you did." My voice was calm, but inside I was unraveling. "And you kept doing it, over and over." She looked away, guilt flashing across her face. Good. She should feel guilty. She should feel everything. I turned away from her, because if I looked at her for one more second, I might lose whatever was left of my self-control. She reached for me then, her fingers brushing against my arm. "Please don't." I pulled away. Her touch felt like a wound reopening, like salt on raw flesh. "I can't do this," I said. She froze. "What do you mean?" I turned back to face her, my heart pounding. "I mean, I can't be with you. Not after this. Not after knowing what you've done." Her breath hitched. For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. She thought I would stay. She thought she still had power over me. But she was wrong. Because at that moment, I knew I was done. She stared at me, eyes wide with disbelief, as if she hadn't expected me to say it. As if she thought she could still fix this. Still manipulate the outcome to her advantage. "You don't mean that," she said, her voice almost desperate. I almost laughed. She was a desperate one now. I shook my head. "I mean every word." Her hands trembled as she reached for me again, but I stepped back. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I can explain." I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. "You had months to explain, but you didn't. You had months to choose me, but you didn't." She flinched, her lips parting as if she had something to say, but she didn't, because there was nothing left to say. I saw the shift in her expression then. The fear in her eyes faded, replaced by something colder. Anger. She wasn't sorry I was leaving. She was sorry she'd lost control. "You're just going to walk away?" she asked, her voice sharp now. "After everything we've been through?" I let out a slow breath. "You already walked away. The second you let him touch you." Her face twisted with frustration. "It's not that simple." I tilted my head, staring at her like she was a stranger. "It is for me." She let out a bitter laugh. "So that's it? You're just done?" I nodded. "Yeah, I'm done." She shook her head, stepping forward again. "You don't just stop loving someone overnight." I stared at her, my chest aching with the weight of everything she had done. "I didn't stop loving you overnight," I said quietly. "You just made it impossible to love you anymore." Her face crumbled for a split second before she forced herself to stand taller. "You'll regret this," she spat. I almost smiled. Not because I found any of this funny. There was nothing funny about watching the person you love become a stranger before your eyes. But because I knew I wouldn't regret it. Not now. Not ever. Without another word, I turned and walked toward the door. She didn't stop me. She didn't beg. She just stood there, watching as I left her behind. And for the first time in months, maybe even years, I finally felt free. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing her away like a ghost from a past life. I stood there for a moment, just breathing. The air outside felt different, lighter, but also strange, like I had stepped into a world I no longer recognized. Everything I knew had changed in an instant. I pulled my phone from my pocket, staring at the screen without really seeing it. No missed calls, no messages, nothing from her. I should have felt relieved. I should have felt powerful for walking away first. But all I felt was empty. I made my way to my car, my body moving on autopilot. The moment I slid into the driver's seat, my hands tightened around the steering wheel. My knuckles went white. And then, without warning, the rage hit me. I slammed my fist against the dashboard, once, twice, anything to release the pressure building inside me. How dare she? How dare she look me in the eyes and lie? How dare she pretend to care? Pretend that we still had something worth saving. Months of betrayal. And she had the audacity to act like I was the one giving up? I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing myself to breathe. I couldn't let her have this power over me. I couldn't let her ruin me. I turned the key in the ignition, the engine roaring to life. The sound grounded me, reminded me that I was still here, still standing, still breathing. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay. I drove without thinking, the city lights blurring past me. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. At a red light, my phone vibrated in the passenger seat. I glanced at the screen. Her. For a second, I hesitated. A part of me still wanted to hear her voice, to let her explain, even though I already knew there was no explanation that would ever be enough. I let it ring. Then I turned off my phone. I wasn't hers anymore, and she wasn't mine. I drove for hours. No destination, no plan, just the road and the sound of my own breathing. The city lights faded behind me, replaced by the quiet darkness of the open highway. I told myself I was escaping, but the truth was I was running in circles, inside my own head, trapped with the memories I couldn't outrun. Every moment with her replayed like a cruel joke. The late-night whispers, the way she used to look at me, the laughter we shared in the spaces between arguments. Was it all a lie? Had she ever really loved me, or was I just convenient? Someone to come home to while she lived another life behind my back? I gripped the steering wheel tighter. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was knowing that I meant nothing to her. I pulled over at a gas station, stepping out into the cold night air. I needed to breathe, to clear my head. I leaned against the car, staring up at the sky. It was strange, how the world kept moving, how the stars still shined, how everything around me remained the same while my life had been torn apart. She was probably still in our apartment. Maybe she was crying. Maybe she was furious. Maybe she had already called him. I clenched my jaw. I couldn't think about that. I wouldn't. A part of me wanted to go back, to scream at her, to demand to know why. But I already knew there were no real answers. Just excuses, just regret. That didn't matter anymore. I pulled my phone from my pocket, staring at the black screen. For a second, I was tempted to turn it on, to see if she had called again. But I didn't. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I deleted her number. My hands trembled as I pressed the final button. It felt like cutting away a piece of myself. But maybe that was what I needed. Maybe it was the only way to start over. I took one last deep breath before getting back into the car. And this time, when I started driving, I knew I wasn't going back. The road stretched endlessly before me, a ribbon of black asphalt cutting through the night. For the first time in years, I had nowhere to be, no one waiting for me, no one to answer to. It should have felt liberating. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into a void. I kept driving until the gas gauge dipped close to empty. By the time I pulled into a cheap roadside motel, exhaustion had settled into my bones. My body was numb, my mind hollow. I paid in cash. The old man behind the desk barely glanced at me before sliding the key across the counter. Room 104. A single bed, a flickering TV, and the kind of silence that pressed against my ears like a warning. I dropped my bag on the floor and collapsed onto the mattress, staring at the ceiling. Everything felt surreal. I had spent years building a life with her, and in a single night, it had unraveled. Did she care that I was gone? Was she calling him now? Cry into his arms, telling him that I had overreacted? I squeezed my eyes shut. It didn't matter. I didn't matter to her. I turned onto my side, gripping the pillow like it could anchor me to something real. The scent hit me before I could stop it. Laundry detergent. Faint traces of her perfume, still clinging to my clothes. I sat up, yanking off my jacket, my shirt, anything that carried her ghost. I threw them into a pile in the corner of the room, breathing hard. I needed to forget. I grabbed my phone, hesitating before turning it back on. A flood of missed calls and messages flashed across the screen, all from her. I forced myself to read them. We need to talk. Please answer. You don't understand, just let me explain. You're being childish. Fine. If you want to throw this away, that's on you. I stare at the last message, my jaw tightening. If I wanted to throw this away, she was the one who had thrown it away. She was the one who had betrayed me. And yet, somehow, she still thought she had the right to be angry. I hovered over her name for a moment. Then I blocked her. Just like that, the connection was severed. No more explanations, no more manipulation, no more her. I tossed the phone onto the nightstand and lay back down, staring at the ceiling. For the first time, I was truly alone. And for the first time, I thought maybe that was exactly what I needed. I didn't sleep that night. I closed my eyes, but my mind wouldn't let me rest. Every time I drifted, I saw her face, heard her voice, felt the weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest. I had blocked her. I had walked away. I had done everything I was supposed to do. So why did it still feel like she had won? I sat up, rubbing my face. The motel room was quiet, the air stale. My phone sat on the nightstand, screen dark, lifeless. No more messages. No more calls. Just silence. I used to dream of silence. Of peace. Now, it felt like a punishment. I pulled on a clean shirt and stepped outside, letting the crisp night air slap me awake. The parking lot was empty, except for a few scattered cars. A neon vacancy sign buzzed in the distance. Everything was so still, so normal. It made me angry. How could the world keep spinning when mine had fallen apart? How could the stars still shine, the wind still blow, the night still exist, when nothing made sense anymore? I sat down on the curb, resting my elbows on my knees. My fingers found the cold metal of my car keys, and I turned them over my palm, thinking, where was I supposed to go? I had spent so much time loving her, fighting for her, believing in her. And now that she was gone, there was nothing, no home, no plan, just an empty road stretching ahead of me, leading nowhere. I closed my eyes and let out a slow breath. Maybe that was the point. Maybe there was freedom in not knowing. Maybe, for the first time in my life, I had the chance to start over. A blank slate, a new beginning. And this time, no one could take it from me. Morning came like a thief, stealing away the comfort of the night's numbness. I hadn't slept, not really, just lay there, staring at the ceiling, lost in a limbo between exhaustion and restlessness. The motel room was as empty as I felt. The sheets were tangled around me, my jacket still in a heap on the floor. For a brief second, I forgot where I was. Then it all came crashing back. The betrayal, the fight, the messages I had read before blocking her. She was gone. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt haunted. I dragged myself out of bed, moving on autopilot, a splash of cold water to the face. A cheap coffee from a vending machine outside. The bitter taste was welcome. It was the only thing that reminded me I was still here, still breathing. My phone was still on the nightstand, face down. I didn't want to pick it up. Didn't want to see if there were messages from friends, from people who had no idea what had happened. Did she tell them? Did she spin her own version of the story? I almost laughed at the thought. Of course she would. She was always in control, always knew how to make herself the victim. Maybe she was crying to them now, saying how I overreacted, how it wasn't that serious. Maybe she was with him. That thought made my stomach turn. I needed to get out of here. I threw my things into a bag, barely caring if I left something behind. I just needed distance from this room, from this town, from her. Sliding into the driver's seat, I turned the key in the ignition. The engine hummed beneath me, steady and familiar. I took a deep breath, gripping the steering wheel, and then I drove past the gas stations and empty fields, drove past the places where we used to laugh, where we used to hold hands, drove until I didn't recognize where I was anymore. She was a ghost now, a shadow in my rearview mirror, and I was finally learning how to leave her behind. The road stretched endlessly before me, winding through towns I didn't recognize, past places I had no connection to. I kept driving, watching the gas gauge drop lower and lower, but I didn't care. I just needed to go, to be anywhere but the place where she had broken me. But no matter how far I drove, she was still there in my head. I saw her in the reflection of the windshield, in the quiet moments between songs on the radio, in the way my fingers hesitated when I reached for my phone before remembering there was no one to call. She had been a part of my life for so long that I didn't know who I was without her. That was the worst part. It wasn't the betrayal, the lies, the months of deception. It was the loss of something I had built my world around. I pulled into a rest stop when the gas light finally blinked on. The air was crisp, the sky a dull gray. A few cars were parked nearby, their owners stretching their legs, sipping coffee, laughing with people they loved. I envied them. I stepped out of the car, inhaling deeply, trying to clear my mind. But the moment I closed my eyes, I heard her voice. "You don't understand, just let me explain." I gritted my teeth. I don't want to hear it. But the words kept echoing like a loop in my head. Maybe if I had done things differently, I could have seen it coming. Maybe if I had paid more attention, I would have noticed the cracks before they shattered. I shook my head, clenching my fists. No, this wasn't my fault. I had loved her. I had been loyal. I had trusted her. She was the one who threw it all away, and I was done carrying the weight of her mistakes. I pulled out my phone, staring at the blocked contact screen. The temptation was still there, lingering like an open wound. But I didn't unblock her. Instead, I opened my gallery and started deleting, picture by picture, memory by memory. I erased her from my phone the same way I was trying to erase her from my life. By the time I was finished, the sun had started to rise, casting soft gold light over the horizon. For the first time, I felt something close to peace. I wasn't over it. Not yet, but I was getting there. And that was enough. I sat in my car, staring at the empty gallery on my phone. No more pictures of us. No more saved messages. No more evidence that she had ever been a part of my life. But erasing her from my phone was one thing. Erasing her from my mind, that was something else entirely. I leaned back against the headrest, closing my eyes. Who was I now? For so long, my identity had been tied to her, to us. Every plan, every decision, every future I had imagined, it all included her. And now, nothing. Just an open road, and a man trying to figure out who the hell he was supposed to be without her. I turned the key in the ignition, the engine rumbling to life. I needed to keep moving. Staying still meant thinking, and thinking meant drowning. The next town I stopped in was small, one of those places where everyone probably knew each other's names. I found a diner and stepped inside, the smell of fresh coffee and bacon filling the air. I wasn't hungry, but I ordered anyway. The waitress, mid-40s, tired eyes but a kind smile, poured me a cup of coffee. "You passing through?" I nodded. "Yeah, something like that." She studied me for a second, like she could see through the exhaustion clinging to my skin. Running from something? I almost laughed. Not anymore. She didn't push for details, just topped off my coffee and left me my thoughts. I sipped the bitter liquid, staring at the scratched-up table in front of me. Maybe this was it. Maybe there was no grand realization. No dramatic moment of healing, just small steps, one after another, until one day I woke up and didn't think about her anymore. Maybe I'd stay in this town for a while, or maybe I'd keep driving. I didn't know. For the first time in a long time, that didn't scare me, because she was gone, and I was still here, still standing, still moving forward. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The coffee in my cup had gone cold, but I didn't care. I sat there, fingers wrapped around a ceramic mug, staring at nothing in particular. This was it, wasn't it? The moment where I finally understood what moving on really meant. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving her wrong, making her regret, or finding someone new just to fill the void she left behind. It was about me, about who I was without her. For so long, I had thought of myself as part of a whole, as if my existence was somehow tied to hers, as if without her I was less. But I wasn't. I was still breathing, still waking up every morning, still making choices that had nothing to do with her. She had taken so much from me, but I had something she would never have again, a future without her. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contacts. So many names I hadn't called in a long time. People I had pushed aside, unintentionally, because my world had been her and only her. I clicked on a name. An old friend. Someone I should have never lost touch with. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Damn, man. Didn't think I'd hear from you again. I exhaled a small laugh. Yeah, me neither. There was a pause. Then you okay? I thought about that for a second. I wasn't completely okay. Not yet. Maybe not for a while. But for the first time in a long time, I would be. Yeah, I said, I think I will be. And just like that, I chose to keep living. Not for her. Not for the past. But for me. And that was the real victory. See you soon. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel, so I have the motivation to teach and find stories for you.